How you doing? This is Trey and Beth bringing to you hopefully something that's interesting and informative. We have all been up against the conundrum of vegan versus meat eaters. I think if most of us are like me, and I think Beth might agree here, that nobody wants animal cruelty to happen. And we also don't want to be a snowflake as far as not being able to stomach the idea of meat. I'm a carnivore at heart. I feel like, however, I have a history of working with animals, and the last thing I want is to ever, even fish, I always have like a soft place in my heart for when we catch them and stuff like that. I hope the hooks don't hurt them. Even the deer head on my walls growing up, I would pet the deer more than I would think about the meat. So, yeah. I mean, and I think a lot of us are like that, and it's not the easiest thing in the world. And so what we're going to do is break down the ideas behind, what is going vegan a virtuous endeavor? Is it exclusive to being good? Is it biblical? Beth has a very interesting background. Both of her parents are veterinarians, and she and I both have devoted our lives to taking care of animals. We raise and train and board dogs, so the owners and the dogs are in our everyday lives. So, and we both eat meat, and we both eat fish, and we both have hunted, and all these things. And we want to kind of make heads or tails of it because I've got some friends out in the wilderness of the internet that are really staunch on veganism. And I'll be honest, I've done the Atkins diet, and I've done a vegan diet, and neither one of them has worked out for me. And so we're going to talk to Beth. She's got some interesting takes on this. We're going to talk about cattle trails and how food can be nomadic when it's alive or moving rather than planted in the ground. The idea of just the general health and the science behind it and stuff like that. Beth, how are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great, Trey. Thanks so much. I was a little bit about my background. You touched on my parents are vets, and we have a cattle farm in Tennessee, and I grew up with that. And there's always been this kind of disconnect as far as like what we do now, as far as caring for animals. We care for dogs, and my parents have always cared for animals, and we love them, and we give them shots, and we do the medicine, and we provide for them, in the winter with hay, etc. And it's always been very important to us to take care of the animals. But then on the flip side, I've always struggled with the fact that we eat them, and we always have beef for dinner. What's for dinner? Beef. And we've always come to that, and I always struggled with that. And how do we care for animals and then we eat them? Like it's kind of a disconnect, but it makes sense when you think about the history of food and the history of civilization, as far as being the elevated form, the evolution of going from hunter-gathering into farming, and the amount of farming that has to do with crops, but also with beef in particular. We're going to talk about livestock. So that's something that I know about. I worked in the livestock industry. I have a bachelor's degree in biology and chemistry. And again, that's kind of my background. And so working in that industry, in the livestock industry, and then learning about it in Texas as being Texas history, I never understood why it was important for us to learn the cattle drive trails of going from one place to another, or why the Brazos River was important, or all these kinds of things. And that's something that I wanted to touch base on, because now as I get older, I've been putting it together. And I think a lot of people don't understand, and they just think that beef comes from the grocery store, and thinking about it. And then you can also think from farm to plate, and you go with the idea that, okay, well, you raise a cow and then you slaughter it and then you eat it, but there's a lot more to it, and there's a lot of reasons why. And so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, because I don't think that people really know why. What's the reason why we eat beef, why it's important.
And also a good point that you were making earlier has to do with how agriculture feeds the animals
Right,
for us
exactly.
to eat. That some of their diets are their stomachs are made to ingest things like corn, where ours are not. And
Exactly. It would have been fascinating points that I think is really interesting, and that my mom and I've always talked about is the fact that cattle are so interesting because they can eat grass, right? You don't really have, they're sustainable creatures and they eat the grass, they drink the water, but the grass is cellulose. And so the most amazing thing is that happens is that they have 4 chambers of their stomachs, but they can convert cellulose from the grass into protein, which is then what we do. And we eat the protein, which is what humans need to survive.
let me interject just to make sure. So when cattle with their stomach chambers, is that right? They have 4
Yeah.
stomach chambers.
There's 4.
They convert cellulose into protein, and we cannot. Is that correct?
Correct. There's no way. If we eat grass, we're just going to have it pass through us. It's like when we eat corn, for example. How many times do we look in the toilet and we're like, wait, I thought I ate corn. I didn't realize.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But it's like our bodies aren't really made for processing that type of food. And so having been working in the livestock industry and working with sale barns and auction markets and stuff like that, and knowing how the cow gets from farm to plate, farm to table, and knowing the process that it takes, there's a couple of little steps, and there's reasons why the steps are what they are. So today we have the big difference between grass-fed versus corn-fed beef. And now it's very in vogue to be eating grass-fed beef. Now, the reason why corn is so important in corn-fed beef and stuff like that is because it's the most efficient way to fatten up a cow and for them to get the nutrients that they need in the form of that cellulose, like the grass and stuff like that. And then they convert it into the protein, which is then what the humans eat. And so the majority of sale barns, let's say, for example, and there's, I don't know how many, like over 1,000 or so in the US and in Canada alone. And this is where the auction markets happen. And this is where you get the price of beef. And so cattle buyers go to the market. You see small producers like my family. We have about 150 head of cattle. So we're a producer, and we take our cattle, we take the steer crop, and I can go into more detail about this, but you take a certain amount of cows, okay, and they're steers usually. You take them to market to sell. The buyers are going to be representing the feedlots, and the buyers then take the cattle to the feedlots. Now, what do they do at the feedlots? They have them lined up with troughs, and the troughs are filled with corn. Okay, the corn, the sorghum, the soy, all of that kind of stuff to fatten them up so that they can then be sold to the packer and go to the slaughterhouse and be packed. And then that's how it gets to your table or it gets to the grocery store. And that's corn-fed beef. Now, grass-fed beef is usually a lot like you can have an alliance, which is the opposite of an auction. An alliance is basically you just take the cow and the producer is directly with the packers. So they sell directly to a third party or to a packer that will then take out the middleman, which is the auction market, which in my opinion, I worked for Livestock Marketing Association in Kansas City, and they are the ones that do the fair price value. So you know what the fair market value is for a pound of beef.
So my take on a lot of this is most of us can relate to the idea of the farmer or the cattle baron that cares for the livestock, and they live a good life until they go to slaughter.
Right.
And where a lot of things come in is where we have these mass production slaughterhouses, where the scruples come in, and where it becomes not virtuous or kind, if we care about God's creatures and stuff, right. To mass produce meat and find us worrying about we're contributing to cruelty, which I think is where a lot of the underlying guilt that can maybe rightly so be associated with, nobody I know really wants to be cruel to animals unless you're a psychopath.
Right.
And it's not that crazy to say, why should I be able to contribute to my own dinner plate when I'm not starving and stuff like that. So, but there are some ideas that I want you to elaborate on that we were talking about that has to do with the fact that animals can move themselves and the cattle trails and stuff like that, and why certain areas are beef heavy and cattle heavy and stuff like that, or sheep and stuff like that.
Right. Excuse me, sorry. And my voice is a little raspy. And I apologize for that, but bear with me. So one of the questions that I had that always was a conundrum for me, aside from the fact that my parents cared for animals, they were vets, we had cattle, and we would take care of the cattle. We would give them ivermectin. We give them blackleg. We would give them the shots that they needed in order to be healthy, so that then they can be their best and be the healthiest for eventually, us digesting and, for them to procreate and to live. And one of the things from Texas history that always bothered me was we were learning, this is like 7th grade. We're learning like the Goodnight Loving Trail, or we're learning one of the cattle trails, like the Midnight such and such. I can't remember the names of them. I did pay attention, but it's been quite a while since I've been in.
Well, but also high. Why it's important to know where the rivers run and stuff like that.
Exactly.
All the cattle trails run along, at least, even if they have to skip from one body of water to the other.
Right. If you think of Lonesome Dove, if you've ever seen the movie Lonesome Dove, and they're taking a herd of cattle from Texas up to Montana, and they're going through and they're going along the rivers. They're finding the rivers because the cattle are the most efficient way of transporting protein and fats, because the cattle can move with you. You don't have to carry them in a can or put them in a
wagon.
In a wagon that the cook will take with them. If you've seen City Slickers, the cookie is the one that carries all this stuff, and it's a kind of a misnomer that people think that beans is what everybody ate. And we'll get to that point in just a second, because I know most Texans are going to say, no, chili is only made with meat and no beans. Don't you dare put beans in my chili. Okay.
It's not because beans are not good. There's another reason for it.
There's another reason for it. We'll get to that in just a second. But the cattle move themselves. So the protein and the fats move themselves, and it's easier to transport. And then they also are self-sustaining because they eat the grass along the way and they drink the water that's in the rivers, which is why it was important for those trails to be known, and for them to follow these trails that go, up through Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, up to Montana, Wyoming, Montana, and do all the different livestock stations where you've got Kansas City or Chicago or that sort of thing, where you've got these the markets. And back in the day, we didn't have cars, we didn't have the transportation, we didn't have the electricity in order to transport. We didn't have the refrigeration to transport frozen frozen vegetables or perishables that would then expire really quickly.
Refrigerated protein.
Or refrigerated protein at that. And that's where you get into the fact that, as you go along the trail, you can have protein readily available for those that are traveling. So the pioneers that are going out exploring the West, and they're traveling from the east of the United States out to the West, they had the wagons, they had all that stuff with the horses and everything. They didn't have cars.
Now, considering that obviously we've evolved with technology and transportation, that we're not driving these animals north and south from Montana down to Texas or up from Mexico, and we're not stopping along the way to the rodeos and stuff like that where they get to show off their stuff, maybe make a little money. The idea that we do have a way to transport these guys, does that change? When I say virtue, I mean like the kind of the scruples of the idea of eating meat, period. Does it change with mass production and things like that seem to me at times, I mean, nobody wants to visit a meat packing plant.
No,
right?
no.
And there's a reason why, because it there's something about it that seems cruel. And with technology today, do you think that we're on the right track, or that we've kind of gone astray as far as how we're handling things?
Well, I think, this is a good question, because you get back to what you were starting to talk about earlier about veganism or vegetarians or whatever versus carnivores or omnivores. And the thing is like I said, the most efficient way to transport protein and fats, which is what our body needs as humans. And we aren't able to process cellulose. We're not able to process the grass that's abundant along the rivers, along the trails that take food from one place to the other. And we're not allowed to do that. We're not able to do that. And it's important because what happens if the power grid goes out? Okay, we don't have refrigeration anymore. What
Right.
happens? What happens when electricity...
Fuel, just general fuel.
Or just general fuel. Fuel's too expensive. We don't have electric vehicles. Electric grid goes out, or whatever it is that we use to transport. So it is very important. And here's the other thing too, is that there's such a shelf life, a short shelf life on vegetables and anything that a vegetarian or vegan might eat. And you don't get the proteins that are needed. I mean, you've got supplements and things like that, but let's think about it. Back in the day, you went from hunter-gatherers to farming, okay? And you had the farming, and it made more sense because you got fences, you have barbed wire, you have areas, but you're stuck. You're geographically located and you're beholden to that particular property. Now, nomads like the Indians and things, they would go after the protein. They would hunt and follow the protein, the buffalo, and they would go across the U.S. doing that. And what's important to realize is that in war situations or anything kind of catastrophic, we aren't going to have the ability. What if you have to vacate your home? What if your home burns in a fire? What if you've got things that are perilous enough to make you have to be nomadic and have to travel? You can't bring your garden with you. And that's the thing that's just the most, you can't bring your crops with you.
Well, if you think about just the idea of, okay, we're going to pack up and survive for the next month.
Right.
Traveling, and this seems kind of doomsday, but we're in strange times, and if the power grid goes out, you better have some kind of forethought, in my opinion, as to how you're going to handle stuff. Packing up a bunch of frozen bags of peas is not going to last you very long.
Right.
And especially if you're out, moving around. And I know a lot of people are probably thinking this is insane, but we live in Texas. This still is a viable idea to be in Weimar, Texas, and have to get to Dallas.
Right.
And how are you going to, and you've got 100 people that are going to go with you, and someone's going to take the lead and move enough food to Dallas for, first of all, to get to market maybe, or to find a place to settle and get the calories. I mean, calories at the end of the day are what you have to survive. And you're going to load up. First of all, if you load up a bunch of corn, you're not going to survive very long on that and stay healthy. And just think about even wheat, which is pretty, pretty viable as far as something to survive on.
Yeah.
How much space it takes up. And guess what? You have to have animals that are going to carry the stuff with you. Now, this is if we are without fuel. I mean, it's not that crazy. In my lifetime, we've seen not situations where we can't get fuel. I've been through hurricane seasons where just by accident you have no electricity, nothing.
Right.
And so one thing you do have is the sun that in photosynthesis that grows grass.
Right.
And animals can move themselves. You can
Yep.
take, a 1,200 pound steer,
Yep.
and he's going to walk with you, and he can eat along the way. You don't have
Yep.
to carry their food. You don't have to do anything.
Right.
And a lot of these old the trails, they would allot, every 2 days, if they had, say, every couple of days, they would allot a steer to be slaughtered. And that's where the coal bucks and stuff like that would come in. They would pick the ones that they were going to do. And also, like you were saying earlier, they can procreate along the way.
Yeah.
Your beans are not going to make more beans while they're sitting in a.
They're not magic beans. It's
Yeah.
not. They're not making beanstalks that are going to travel with you.
So, but there's another thing in Texas. If you know anything about how we take care of our chili here, there's a big dissent from people outside of Texas that put beans in their chili. I actually like beans in my chili. I'm from Tennessee, and I like to make it go a little farther.
Me too.
And people think, oh, you do? You prefer beans?
Oh, I love beans in the chili.
So the idea is that if you're a self-sustaining property, you're the type of person that is going. If you're an agriculture type person or farmer, you're going to put beans in your meat because they're high in protein.
Yep.
But Texans just scoff at it to
Yeah.
no end. Why is that, do you think?
Oh man, I've been in many a Texas Aggie conversation.
And we're both longtime Texans here. So.
We're longtime Texans, but we're both from Tennessee, which is interesting about Middle Tennessee, about outside Nashville. And that's where my family farm is, with the cattle. But the thing with the beans is that it just didn't make sense back in the day. Before electricity, before all of this kind of stuff, running water, that wasn't the river, things like that. It didn't make sense to carry 1,200 pounds of beans when you've got 1,200 pounds that can move itself. Mm-hmm. And the beans just became not part of the diet. And so that's where you kind of get that history lesson. If you think about the history and the civilization and the evolution from, like I said earlier, from hunting, gathering to farming, when you're stationary and you're geographically beholden to a particular parcel of land or something, you've got the ability to add the beans, to add the crops and things like that to your meat diet. But I really feel like, and I could be wrong here, but I'm pretty sure that the whole dilemma with beans versus not beans in the chili has to do with the availability of it on the trails.
Well, and so if you think about the idea of becoming nomadic by choice or not, war, someone encroaching on your land, having to get out of there because of a disaster, all these things come into play. And if you can't move your food, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
And so then you come into, all right, I don't know how biblical you may be if you're listening, but it's like, okay, does God want us to eat animals? And I can't get past the idea that the answer is yes. However, I've tried to debunk it, and it's a rough sport to try and do it, because we reign over the animals, and if you go through Genesis, it doesn't say consume them, and can you live off of berries and stuff like that and live to be a biblical age? Possibly. It doesn't seem that we're set up for that right now. And I'm not, the reason we're talking about it is because we want to kind of dive deep into the discussion about it, because maybe some of you are vegan and have some insight into this. And how do you, to me, you want to move 100 people, grab 3 steer and start walking west, or start walking north.
Just start moving your feet.
And know your trail and don't die. But otherwise, you need to load up. You need to dig up all your turnips and all your corn and all your stuff, and there's a shelf life on it that's a lot less than the shelf life of a living steer. And so if you find yourself looking forward, I mean, we've all got to be at least looking a little bit forward to what happens if something unexpected happens. And it happens in hurricanes. It happens in, snowstorms and stuff like that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And what if it happens to an extent that, the biblical nature of our future kind of sets in?
Yeah. The idea that you've got a sustainable food source that can move itself, that you don't have to carry and you don't have to worry about the longevity and the shelf life of that particular food item is...
Well, when you're talking about that, get into a little bit of the science of it as far as our ability to process these different types of things that we consume today.
Right. Well, as far as human consumption is concerned, the one thing that we have to have in order to survive is protein. And so what the
amino acids, the building blocks of life.
Exactly.
They promote the powerhouse of the cell, which is the
mitochondria. If anybody remembers one thing from high school biology, is that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. But it's interesting because we talk about the cellulose, okay? Cellulose is the grass. That is cell walls. Celery, corn, they have the shells. They have that coating that makes them digestible by the cattle, by the ruminants.
Which is why things like lettuce wilt, okay? Because when they freeze, the cell walls turn into ice, which expands, and it breaks down the cell walls and it turns into mush.
And you no longer have those nutrients available to you.
But we don't digest that. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. I mean, like we will digest like salad, like some leafy greens and things like that are important so that we get the nutrients out of it. But if you think about it, what is corn for? Corn is to feed the cattle. Corn is food for the cattle. And we talked about this, like corn comes out in our waste as humans because it's not easily digestible. So let's think about that for just a second. And then like the fact that you can cure meat, especially when you're on the way, and you use salt in order to jerky the meat.
Ooh, I never thought about that. And it does. It becomes compact.
It becomes a compact. Very dense, compact, and it lives very long. It has a long shelf life, whereas a perishable item like a carrot or, whatever, a bean or something like that, it doesn't easily transport as far as a perishable.
Do you think that because, and I want to tie this into the biblical idea of what is virtuous and right and wrong, that the fact that we do have the technology we have now, that we should shift our idea, kind of like, I guess maybe like slavery or something was, some people would consider necessary. Back in the day, we know it's not. Now we've learned. Right. Is there a shift in where we should be able to look at this, or as far as how we should look at this? To me, nothing new is under the sun. So we are always in danger of going back to square one.
Right.
And if we have lost the technology of being nomadic, then we could be in worse danger than anything that the guilt that goes along with, mass consumption of protein is ever going to bring to, watching, children suffer and things like that.
Right. And we get to the point where the metabolism increases and therefore you need more to replenish it and to keep it active. And a lot of the times we live in a society now that we're so far removed from the farm. And it's really interesting.
It's a great point.
But because you need a high metabolism and you need constant constant feeding in order to keep your metabolism and keep you healthy. Whereas the storage of fats and proteins allows you to maintain a body weight that's going to keep you alive.
Well, I think as far as everything we're talking about, we've hit a lot of bullet points here, and a lot of it has to do with just the science behind it. You know, what do our bodies actually need? There's an argument there that you can survive. There are pescatarians. There are, you know, vegans that, I mean, there are a lot of athletes that have survived and bulk up and do just fine.
Yep.
That are off of vegan diets. There are a lot of us that have grown up being hunters, like myself, and fishermen that also have a soft spot for the idea of animal cruelty in these packing plants and stuff like that. Yet we're not set up. We live in cities. We're not set up to raise our own livestock and stuff like that. So we delve into the whole Tyson Foods stuff, and buying meat out of packing plants and stuff. The idea that we could go back into a kind of a I don't want to call it apocalyptic, but I'm trying to tie this to the biblical, scripture, that it's not the craziest idea that we could not be able to fuel our cars.
Yeah.
And have to pick up and move from a once safe place to a safer place. And then, what does that look like? And it's at least a good conversation to have. Are you aware of the difference between lipids and protein? And, do you know what's digestible? Do you know that beans are the closest thing to being able to complete the entire protein pyramid? The fact that the food pyramid is damn near backwards.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about what it would be like if you had to get up on foot and walk? And what would you bring? Well, to me, I would bring a goat,
Yeah.
and stuff like that. It's just, at least I think what happens is we get caught up in, well, if you eat animals, you're bad.
Right.
Well, no, because I want my children to live. And if it's got to be a goat or my child, I'm picking my child,
Right.
But what does that look like? So I appreciate you sharing, really our history.
Yeah.
Because we train and raise dogs, obviously we don't eat them, but we have a heart for, the well-being of an animal.
Yeah.
And even the owners of the animal and stuff like that. And most people do not want to even stomach the sight of any kind of cruelty to any animal, because we can relate to them way more than plants. There's also the off argument that plants are sentient beings too.
Yeah.
And that's another I've seen some crazy stuff about trees.
Oh my goodness, yes.
That's another show. But thanks, Beth, for sharing
My pleasure.
Your history with your parents being veterinarians and your science background. And I have more affection for animals than I do for most people, and that is the absolute truth.
I think a lot of people can agree to that.
So thanks for tuning in, guys.